Hi there, I'm Construction Gamer and this is Metropolis on City Skylines. In today's episode I'm going to be introducing two new mods to the city. Well, they're not new mods, but they're new to the city. They are Extra Landscaping Tools and the Surface Painter mod. Now the Surface Painter mod requires the Extra Landscaping Tools mod to be installed, but I'm going to show you they do kind of work together in a, well, not in a similar way, but they can work together to complement each other and transform parts of the city. I'm going to show you three distinct ways in which the Surface Painter mod in particular can help with particular areas in certain areas of the city, like the railway tracks, motorway junctions or highway junctions, and some of the dead spaces or what otherwise would be dead spaces between buildings. But first of all, I'm going to jump over. I think I'm going to go back to the Cloverleaf Interchange. Now we redid this in the first modded episode by using the Move It mod, so we've improved some of these junctions, made them look a little bit more realistic. And now what I'm going to do is improve them still further, and I'm going to return to this as well with two more mods in another episode, which again are going to make these junctions look even better. Now you might think I'm introducing loads of mods. In the last episode when we did the colour corrections, I introduced 4 mods, but so far I'm still only loading between 14.6 and 15.2 gigabytes, which seems like a lot, but most of that is taken up with the actual DLCs and things like that. So the game on its own loads about 14 gig if you've got a lot of DLC and content creator packs installed. We haven't actually increased the size of the city much, if not at all really, so don't need to worry too much, and these mods that I'm going to introduce are really quite transformative in terms of how the city looks and feels. So we've got our Extra Landscaping Tools. If we go into landscaping, we do say if we click on trees, for example, click on that, we come up with this new brush options where you can actually brush in a load of trees. So if I wanted to replant these trees that I've just deleted, I could just go ahead. We can increase the brush size to enormous or small, increase the strength and things like that. So that is probably one of the reasons why you need the Extra Landscaping Tools, because it does introduce the actual brush option, which we're going to take a look at. If we go down to the bottom right hand corner where we've got our other options, on the very end it should have Surface Tool. Click on that, and that we still get the brush options, but we get these 5 different things that we can actually paint. So these are just basic textures from the game itself, so they're just vanilla textures. But what we can do is, if you come to this highway, now I want to make this highway slip road look a little bit better. I'm just going to tweak that with Move It before we finalize it, and then come in with the paintbrush tool. We can change the size and we can have kind of fill everything. If we click on these, that'll feather the edges, although I don't think it really matters. You will just get a clean edge with either of these brushes, so it doesn't really matter too much. But what I want to do first of all is down the center here, I think I want this to be concrete rather than a grass median down the middle. Not all, just about there. I think that'll do. Just get rid of that. So I'm left clicking on the pavement texture, and that is just painting texture onto the ground. Now what I normally do is just a really basic kind of thing to make the junctions look better, is just on each of these little entrances or where the slip road comes onto the main highway, is just paint them with the pavement tool, and I think it just makes it look more realistic and looks better. Now the only thing that kind of limits the paintbrush tool is you only work in like 90-degree right angles, so I'll show you what I mean somewhere over here. So if I paint this square, you will just get a square and that's it. If you want to go 45 degrees to that square, you will get funny kind of angles like that. So it is a little bit limited, but there are ways around that. I mean, it doesn't look too bad. You could always come up with trees against that. What I'd normally do if I was going to introduce even more mods or assets, I'd have a pavement asset, and what I've done in the past is taken a pavement asset, which is just a decal, and covered that line up just to make it look a bit better. But you don't have to do that. There are ways to kind of get around that little bit of a quirk with it. So as you can see here, what I'm doing is I'm just using that flat surface, or that flat line, just to create that line there. So I'm just working within the limits of the actual tool, the actual paintbrush. You will see it produces different angles, but it's not the end of the world. I think as a whole it just looks better doing it like this. And there's areas like this which, what I've done with being vanilla is I've just kind of gone to town with trees and planted trees absolutely everywhere, which again isn't that realistic. So areas like this, I reckon in real life would more likely be concrete or gravel, not trees. You wouldn't have trees necessarily so close to the highway as I've got them here. the trees, I always just, with the vanilla build so far, I've just used trees really just to fill in any dead spaces, so we can actually start to get rid of some trees now and make things look a little bit more realistic. Like this here, we might introduce the key anarchy mod further down the line, but if you've got a bit like this, which is a bit rough looking, if you just paint over it with concrete, I know it doesn't transform, it doesn't make it look tons better, but I still think it looks better, and again just improves that level of realism. So just areas like that, you can see it's just made the slip roads look better, I think, more realistic. And we've got a bit of terrain here. You might actually, I think I need to move this pavement in a little bit, just put that back there. There's a little bit of terrain glitching going on, but we can just paint over that. Just imagine there's like a wall, either a concrete wall or sprayed concrete perhaps along here, and this brings us to another little bit of a limitation with paintbrush, is where you have pavements on roads and things, it will sometimes, well, it will always do that, so it will produce that little bit of a crease, a little bit of glitching, which doesn't look great, but we can again just get around that if we make this paintbrush a little bit smaller and just hide it amongst the trees. So yeah, you'll see there you've got a little bit of glitching almost where pavement's gone, but in general this mod is pretty good actually. So we've gone from the highway. I think we've improved that. We could possibly go on let's do one more. Let's do this one here. I reckon this would either be gravel or pavement, or concrete rather. We're using pavement as concrete, aren't we? So just chuck all that in there as pavement. I think probably a little bit more accurate, a little bit more realistic, and then just finish that off with a nice flat line like that. So yeah, there we go. I think that's pretty much demonstrated that one. Let's just see, there's like here where I've supercharged my roundabout with a kind of trumpet almost. We've got a bit of pavement on here which you probably wouldn't have in real life, so maybe if we come in with gravel on this little bit, no, gravel, that is gravel. Because of the Clara LUT and theme that I'm using, the gravel is quite light, which looks a bit more, usually if you're using a different LUT or maybe a vanilla, then the gravel usually looks a bit more brown, doesn't it? But yeah, just fill in these spaces here and it replaces the pavement. I think you might be able to just about make it out. So there we've got pavement. Let's get rid of the paintbrush by right clicking, or the area we've just painted, and then if we come back in with the gravel, it actually replaces the pavement like so. So we can just improve little bits like that. Have I got another roundabout? Well, I've got roundabouts everywhere. Let's say, for example, this bit, instead of having concrete, we'll just have a bit of pavement down the middle there. Maybe actually the whole roundabout can have gravel in the middle, just a little bit. Maybe this one as well. Bit of gravel in the middle just makes it look a lot better. So that's Junctions, and that's one more. It's addictive, this painting though. That's the only thing you can spend all day just painting. But I pay particular interest to the junctions, the slip roads. I think that's where the biggest kind of payoff is. It makes them look so much better. Try and make them look a little bit even, like so. Let's take a look at that one. This junction isn't quite even anyway, but we'll make it look a little bit more symmetrical, and maybe even just paint some pavement down the middle of the barriers instead of having grass. Particularly in built up areas, you're probably more likely to have a pavement in the middle of your highway sections than you are to have grass. I suppose you might have a little bit of grass when you start to come towards like the more rural areas where there's no barriers between each of the lanes, but in a built-up urban area, you're more likely to have pavement, or concrete rather, using pavement and concrete interchangeably here. So there we are. I think that makes it look better. Let's go back to the Cloverleaf. That looks better. Maybe a little bit of a patch there, perhaps, just connecting those two sections up. And again here, you might just have a little bit of a paved area, concrete area, connecting those two sections up like so. Now what you can do is the areas which aren't painted with pavement or concrete, come back in with trees, or you might want to use something else. Let's just fill that back in like so. But what you could also use is, you've got some vanilla assets here which came with the Park Life DLC. So when you go to select some vegetation in the vegetation tab, or even a tree, if you just want to plant one with the brush options bar loaded, you've got to put that down to 0 or single. Sometimes it says 0, sometimes it says single, so you put that down to single and you can just place maybe just a bit of vegetation in the middle there, just to give it a little bit of detail. And these should be available on the vanilla game. I don't think you have to have the Park Life DLC to actually have access to this. I think it came with the update, but you can just use paintbrush and trees and vegetation in concert with each other, just to really make the junctions look so much better. Just fill in any dead spaces basically that I usually find. If I don't have access to tools like this, I will just chuck trees in, and that's what I have done up till now. But now I have access to the actual mod itself, I might just decide that I want to make each of these junctions look a lot better. So yeah, I think again we've improved. I know I've said again many times, but we've improved this junction still further. So we've improved it with Move It mod, and we've improved it with the Surface Painter tool, like so. Now the next thing we're going to take a look at is the rails. Now we played around with this junction in the Move It mod episode, and it's still a bit of a tangle. I know it's not the best rail junction ever, but one thing you do come across is probably better demonstrated down here. Now I've played around with Move It on this railway station approach, made these junctions a little bit better. I know they're still not super accurate, but they are better. But what you can see here is a bit of glitching where I've probably overcooked it with Move It, and we do have the ballast or the stone, the gravel has disappeared from underneath there. But you don't. If you want your junction to stay in that place, then what you can do is, if we come back with our surface tool, click on the gravel. Now the texture underneath the railways is gravel, so select gravel, and we can actually just paint over that and replace the gravel that's disappeared from underneath of the railway track. And actually, I want the gravel to go right up all over this section, because this really will improve the look of the approach. So I'm going to paint over this entire approach up to that tunnel. I think we'll have gravel all the way down. Maybe just stop it about there, I reckon. The rest of this does want to be gravel, and so does this up to that tunnel approach, tunnel entrance, right down there, like that. Now I might be tempted, not having Key Anarchy just yet, is to paint this with the concrete brush. Now the only trouble with this is the junctions between the different painted textures. Now you saw before, like here, where the pavement kind of disappears, which is a little bit of an issue, but you can sort of hide it a little bit underneath the track, just where the sleepers are. I mean, you can still, if you zoom right in, you can see the little bits of where the texture's disappeared or the surface has disappeared, but it's hidden, isn't it? So we can pretend there's a concrete retaining wall along here, and you will end up with a little bit there, which is a little bit frustrating, but I think in general it just makes the area look better. So you might not want to paint the entire area with concrete, that might be overcooking it a little bit, but certainly any dead space like that wants to be concrete, I reckon. And you can work within the limits of the paintbrush. So just if we make the actual that bit there, so like that, if we actually make that a feature rather than trying to ignore it altogether. So if we actually work with that line all the way down, like so, like that, and then if we have it stepping out a little bit where this wall or this cliff, it's more of a cliff texture, isn't it, that we've got, do a little bit like that, like so. And then if we come in with the gravel and we actually fill that space, you do get a bit of a seam between any two surfaces or any two textures, but I think in general it just looks so much better. Now you could go to town with this. It is, you do have the tendency to start painting everywhere, because like I said, it is addictive, but you do have to kind of at some stage just think, no, that's enough. Maybe if you just go around the back, because obviously if you do paint whole areas with grey, I mean, we've got a grey texture for the gravel in this particular instance because of the theme we're using, and the grey concrete as well, it can start to get a little bit too much. So you do have to be a little bit more careful with it, but it does help, particularly around these rail junctions. This is the second thing I wanted to show you, was the rail junctions. So if you paint that in, like we did with the highway, when you've got two roads coming together, you would have a bit of ballast. I think that needs to just come up a little bit. Just need to play around with this, just make that look a little bit better. Is that all right? And then, like we did with the highway, junction, you would have some ballast. Or having said that, I think the ballast probably wants to come all the way up to that cargo hub there, and all the way between those two tracks, like so. I think all the way down here as well, where you've got two separate tracks. Maybe not where the tracks are far apart, but if the tracks are close together, certainly have some gravel. Maybe paint over that cliff texture, certainly over that cliff texture there. That makes a big difference to how it looks. It doesn't look so awkward if you paint over the cliff textures, and I think that's all right actually. And then down here to about there. But certainly when you've got any junction, I'd say, like, come down here, bit of paint, that junction instantly looks a lot better than it did before in my opinion. And then just, I think we'll paint all the way over here, right click in to get rid of any overspill if we've gone a little bit too far, just paint over that little bit. We've got any more? We've got, that's elevated, so we don't need to do that, but we'll do this one again just. And finally we'll just finish this junction off as well down here. I think this side wants to be concrete perhaps, just again working within the limits where you do get, you can only work within a 90 degree to itself. If it looks a bit rubbish, then come in with the gravel, try and hide any of the unevenness underneath of the actual sleepers themselves, so you can hide some of that ugliness. And you can do this similar underneath of highway approaches like this as well. So if you just kind of push it under, you can still see it from some angles, but it's hidden, isn't it? It's not in the direct line of sight, so you can cheat a little bit. That's if you don't want to use any decals, that is. So you can get lots of decals, so you can get a pavement decal, and I'm pretty sure you can get a gravel decal as well, which would help fix any of these areas. But if you don't want to do that, then you can play around with the paintbrush to your advantage, work with the limitations of it basically. So there we are. I think I've done most of them, haven't I? If we come back to this, it's still a mess, but it looks a better mess now. You know, it doesn't look so ugly with all the gravel painted down the middle and then coming back to the highway. Now the last thing I want to look at is the dead space in between buildings. Now you will get a lot of these, unless you're a super detailer and you move buildings around manually with Move It mod. I mean, you can't do that. I didn't show you that actually in that Move It episode. I did concentrate solely on the rails and the highway, but a big part of it is moving buildings. So you could spend hours moving buildings around, but you'll still end up with dead spaces like this, which are just full of nothing. What I normally do is just chuck some trees in and just have done with it, and that's what I've done up to now with the vanilla build, because I haven't had access to the paintbrush mod. So what I want to do is just come in and paint over areas which I think probably would be pavement in real life or concrete. The only thing you need to look out for, like with the actual pavements on the street, any pavements that you have placed will also kind of get awkwardness like that, any ugliness appearing, so you'll get a bit of the pavement disappearing. So you need to be a bit careful with this, I reckon. So just select areas where you can paint right up to the pavement. Now there is one good thing, and that is where there are buildings together like this. So let's can I find a good space that's not kind of chock-a-block? Can't. They're all, we do have good land usage actually on this, but let's see, for example here, if I paint up to about there, you can see we do have some ugliness, but if we paint up to the pavement which belongs to a building, you will see that ugliness disappears, so there's no kind of glitching or anything, and then we can just kind of paint a nice straight area, maybe the likes of these car parks. Now it doesn't look like there's a space for a car to get down there, so you maybe imagine that you can use this land here to get to the car parks at the rear. Like this road here, we've got a bit of kind of ugliness, we can just paint over that and that all looks better. Most of this area is actually well built upon, and there aren't many areas which I would consider dead. I mean, likes of, I guess behind here you possibly might not have trees right up to the building like that. So we do have a pavement, so we are going to have to be careful about our painting, but paint over that, get rid of that tree. You can see if I just paint right up to that, you've got no ugliness going on at all. Just maybe put a nice angle on that with a bit of pavement right up to the back of that building, so it's got a nice angle. And I guess the rest of this needs to be painted as well. So I know, again, you could just paint loads and loads of areas with paintbrush. You do need to be careful. You want to mix it up. You do want to have some trees in the mix, but there are some areas, I guess, that probably, although we do have a bit of glitching between a pavement I put on, so we can just paint over that a little bit up to the building. But there is one good thing with the Parklife pavement, is they will hide some of that ugliness apart from the areas at which they connect to another pavement. So you do have to be a little bit careful. You might just want to paint over that area there, but you can see it hides some of it. I think over here again we might just paint that little bit using Parklife pavements just to hide some of the ugliness that we would have otherwise had. Just kind of play around with it until we're happy with how it's looking. Maybe just get rid of these trees, paint over that little bit. Although having said that, we are getting a bit of ugliness there. That's because that is just a pavement that I put in, so I think we're going to have to push that back. Yeah, I mean, if you're not willing to, or you don't want to have to subscribe to decals, you might have to live with some bits like that, but I mean, it's not the end of the world. It still looks better. I think what I will do is I'm going to pick an area. I think, particularly here where we've got lots of angles to each other, so we are going to end up with loads of dead space in between buildings, and I don't reckon you'd have quite so many trees at the rear of some of these older buildings. And I'm going to work on this area for about 10-20 minutes, and then we can see the transformation. So this is what it looks like now with all the trees planted, just to fill in those areas which are kind of dead and there's nothing in them, which might not be hugely realistic. I'm just going to work with the paintbrush, with the surface painter, to improve how this looks. Well, improve maybe questionable, but make it look more realistic. Okie dokie, so I've done some work with the surface painter in this Old Town district area, and although arguably it doesn't look better because we've removed a lot of greenery which made it look a little bit nicer, but I think it looks more realistic with the concrete, especially, you know, in places like this where you'd have a bit of courtyard, and especially where there's like parking places as well. Usually there's like no visible access for the cars, they just kind of drive through or teleport into the space, so I think it looks more realistic if not greener and lusher. But I haven't gone completely mad with the paintbrush and just gone everywhere. I have left some little courtyard areas where with some trees, which is like be a bit of a no man's land, or just somewhere that's kept nice as like a rear garden area. So it's trying to strike that balance between not making it look completely grey and like concrete jungle like, but at the same time trying to make it look a little bit more realistic. Yes, I've just zoomed out there and you can't see the detail of the car park, but if you zoom in you can start to see the car park area, so it starts to make a little bit more sense. So you've got this, otherwise this would have just been completely covered in trees prior to this, and now it's access to these car parks, sort of, even though they have to drive through a little bit of bits of hedges. But it's just a little thing you can do just to make your city that little bit more realistic looking. So there we are, that is the surface painter mod and the extra landscaping tools as well, which you have to subscribe to in order to use that mod. So I'm going to leave it there for today. Say until next time, bye bye.